Welcome to Module 4 in our series in 279W, Windows Server Administration. I'm your instructor, Robert McMillen, and here are our objectives for Module 4. Installing and configuring file services, the file services role services in distributed file systems, other file service role services, disk management, disk quotas, file sharing models, permission inheritance for files and folders, basic folder permissions, and basic file permissions. We're also going to talk about auditing file and folder access and turning on volume shadow copy service and shadow copies of shared folders, which can be very helpful for recovering even if you don't have a backup. So let's talk about storage management. Volume Shadow Copy Service allows administrators to create point-in-time copies of volumes and individual files called snapshots. It's very similar to the type of snapshots that we use in VMware Player, so we can go back in time if we need to, but this does it with files and folders. DFS is a little different. DFS makes it possible to create a single directory tree that includes multiple file servers and their file shares. So what DFS does, it allows you to take two servers and replicate shared data between them. So if one server goes down, then the other server can pick up the slack, and this is without the need for clustering. So it's a lot easier to set up. You don't have to have the enterprise version to make it work, and it gives you redundancy. File replication service is a little different than DFS. So FRS makes it possible to synchronize data across the enterprise and is in fact the synchronization technology used by Active Directory. So what FRS does is it allows replication from one Active Directory domain controller to another. That's all it does. It doesn't have anything to do with user access or files or anything like that. So if you create a new user on one server, it uses file replication service to replicate that new user to all the other domain controllers. So if your schema master is down, which really directs FRS, then it may not be possible to replicate from one domain controller to the other. So it is important to have FRS working. Installing and configuring file services. So file servers provide the central location for storing and sharing files across the network. When many users require access to the same files and application data, you'll need to configure file servers throughout the organization. DFS has two components, the namespace and the replication. So the namespace allows you to group shared folders located on different servers into one more logically structured namespace. So what that means is that you will access these folders, these shared folders, using the same name regardless of which server they're on. Typically you would have DCO1 would be the server you'd go to get file shares. But if you have two servers, DCO1 and DCO2, that are both running distributed file system or DFS, then you would have a third name that both DCO1 and DCO2 would share. So that way if one server was down, the users would never realize that the server was down, and they would continue sharing data off of the other server. Replication with DFS allows for the data between the namespaces to go back and forth to replicate. Other file services role services, File Server Resource Manager, Share and Storage Management, NFS for Network File System, and the Windows Search Service. FSRM defined file screening policies. This is something a lot of IT administrators should use but don't. It allows you to block unauthorized, potentially malicious types of content. For instance, you can go in and tell FSRM to not allow any executables except the ones that you approve. This can keep viruses from happening. You can do the same with VBScript and other types of scripts that may run that you don't want to run. So you can keep that from happening using FSRM. Resource Manager Disk Quotas. You can manage disk space usage by folder and by volume. You can generate storage reports. You can generate these reports as part of a disk quota and file screening management. So what disk quotas do is it allows you to limit how much data a user can save up to the server. And that keeps the server from filling up with junk that people may want to put up there. and cause the server to possibly to crash. So disk quotas are a built-in feature in NTFS, helps you manage and limit disk space usage, and you'll be doing some of that in your lab. Using disk quotas, you can monitor and control the amount of disk space people who access the network can use, and they're configured on a per volume basis. So what that means is you have to go into the C drive and set quotas, the D drive and set quotas, however many drives that you have that you're sharing data, you have to go into each one and set those quotas up per volume. Can be configured to generate warnings and or enforce the limit. So if you get close to your limit, a user will get a message saying, hey, you are almost out of space. But if they actually hit the limit, then it'll say, sorry, I cannot save those files because you've exceeded your limit. As users create files and folders on the volume, an ownership flag is applied. So whoever creates it gets an ownership flag applied, and the space used counts towards the user's quota limit. So it doesn't matter what folder they put it into, the server knows who it is that saved that data, and it will put a limit on there. There's no way to set a specific limit for all volumes on a server across the enterprise. You have to do it for each individual volume. All space used in a volume counts towards the disk quota, even space used in the recycle bin. So you've got to actually empty the recycle bin to completely release that space. By default, disk quotas are disabled. You actually have to turn them on. Before you can configure disk quotas, you have to think carefully about the limit and the warning levels. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Let's go into our server, and we'll just open up computer, and we'll right-click on our C drive, go to Properties, and we'll click on Quotas. To enable quotas, just click the box, enable it, and from here you can say deny when deny space to users when they exceed the quota limit, or you can just uncheck it and leave it as a warning only. You can also check to log events, and you can limit the users right here if you'd like. You can also go into disk quota entries, and you can add and edit and review information from there as well. As I mentioned, you will be doing that in your lab. All right, let's talk about file sharing. Server 2008 supports two file sharing models. The standard file sharing allows remote users to access network resources, such as files, folders, and drives. And then there's the public sharing model. Is where you share files from a computer's system drive, the user's folder, simply by copying or moving files to the folder. So in every time a person logs into the server, they're going to have a system drive, which is whatever drive you installed Windows on, users folder. So just like every computer has a users folder in it, which used to be documents and settings back in the Windows XP days, but now we put it in the users folder. You will have a public share for that folder. That's a default thing. Windows comes up with it on its own. Now, besides that public share, you also have the standard file sharing, which allows you to manually share files, which we will go over in a minute, and you'll be doing in your lab. So, only available on disks formatted with NTFS is the standard file sharing model. If you do FAT, you can get away with sharing folders in a different way. But what we're going to be doing is only on NTFS because it allows you to get all the way down to the file level, which FAT doesn't allow you to do. So, two sets of permissions determine who has access to shared files: the NTFS permissions, or security, the security tab, and the share permissions, or the sharing tab. All shared folders have a share name and a folder path. When a network discovery is enabled, users can browse the network using Network Explorer to find the shares. You can also create hidden shares by adding the $sign to the end of the share name. By default, when you create a share, everyone with access to the network has read access. So you can remove that if you want or change it, but that is the default. So the $, $, $, $, and other drives that are created when you create your server, those all come with the default hidden share. But you want to share folders in order to allow your users access to specific data on the server. So we'll do that together. You can also share CD, DVD drives as well. So there are some administrative shares that are automatically created. The admin $sign share for accessing the system root folder in which the operating system's files reside. and the net logon and sysvol shares, which are created whenever you create a domain controller. As soon as you create a domain controller, it creates these two shares by default. Sysvol is the parent, and that holds all of the Active Directory files in them, the usernames, the passwords, the whole global catalog. And the net logon basically just holds on to the logon scripts, which we discussed in the previous module. So there's several ways you can create a share. You can just go to Windows Explorer, right-click, choose Share. You could use Computer Management. You can share the folders on your local computer and any computer which you want to connect. And you can also go to Command Prompt and choose the Net Share command. Share permissions are applied anytime you access a file or folder over the network. The share permissions available are as follows. Full control, so users can do everything. Read and change, as well as change permissions. And you've got change, where users can read permissions and the additional capability to create files and subfolders. So they can make changes, they can add files, they can delete files, etc. The share permissions read is basically just allows you to read the files, but you can't actually make any changes to them. By default, when you add a folder or file to an existing folder, the folder or file inherits the permissions of the folder. So whatever goes in underneath that parent share inherits everything beneath it. It's automatic, so if you have access to the parent, you have access to the child. If you do not want the permissions or subfolders and files within folders to inherit those, you can override them, which I will show you. Basic folder permissions. These are the permissions you see under the Security tab. You've got full control, which again allows all types of access, as well as the ability to change permissions as well. Modify, which permits reading and writing to files and subfolders and allows deletion, but you can't change permissions. List contents permits viewing and listing of files and subfolders, as well as executing files. So you can just basically see the files. Read and execute allows you to read the files and subfolders as well as executing files. So if there's any executables in there that are allowed, you can run those as well. Write allows you to make changes. And read permits viewing and listing of files and subfolders, but you need the read and execute in order to execute any executable files if there are already programs that are running in there. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to auditing file and folder access as soon as I do a demonstration of file and folder sharing. So let's create a new folder, and we'll call it test. And let's right-click on test, go to properties. So I've got two tabs. I've got the sharing tab and the security tab. So by default, all users can read and execute files. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the sharing tab, and now I can choose two things. I can choose share, or I can choose advanced sharing. I find advanced sharing is a little bit easier to use, especially if you have a folder that has a large amount of data in it. The speed in which it does it on the advanced is much faster, because it doesn't make you wait for it to change all the permissions until it's actually shared. So let's go ahead and click share, and then it automatically chooses the name test. You can change that if you want, but we'll just call it test. Permissions, by default, everyone has read. We're going to do by default, everyone has full. Click OK. Click OK. Now we'll go back to our security, and we'll see that the users still only have read and execute here, but under sharing, they have full access. So what does that mean to you as far as what the users have access? So if we look at this document, we can see file and folder permissions. So share, everyone has full. Security, users in the domain have read. So basically anyone who logs into the domain. Everyone means everyone in the domain, and even people not in the domain. So if you have a computer not joined to the domain, they'll still have full access there. So we have everyone is full and users have read. So if we have a user, and we'll just give his name as Tom. So Tom is a domain user, and he's also part of everyone. So if Tom is in both of these groups, which is true, we add up the permissions and choose the most restrictive. So Tom has full access to the share, and he's got read access to the security. So the most restrictive is going to be read access. So Tom's access to the test folder is going to be read. All right, so now if we have Tom has read access, we'll just get rid of the everyone. And we'll say accountants have full access. Tom is a member. The rules change a little bit here. So everyone has full. Okay, we know Tom is a part of everyone. So on the share side, Tom's got full access. On the security side, Tom has read. But Tom is also a member of the accountants, which have full. So what we do is we add up the shares. So Tom has full under share. And we add up the security. So if Tom has read and Tom has full, well, if you add those two together, you have full. So Tom has full access to share. Tom has full access to security. Add up all the permissions, and the most restrictive is full. So that's how you add up permissions. You add them up here, you add them up here, and then you take the most restrictive. The reason that Tom doesn't have read-only is because we added up the security permissions together and came up with full. And then the most restrictive, of course, is still full. So keep that in mind during these exercises. And now that we've shared this particular file, we can actually see the share by doing / DC01, enter. And now we see our test folder that we just created. We also see the netlogon share and the sysfile share that was created by default because this is a domain controller. All right, let's go back to our lecture here and auditing file and folder access. So to track who accessed files and folders and what they did, you must configure auditing for file and folder access. So I have many customers who say, hey, who deleted this file, or who moved this file, or who made changes to this file? Well, you can find that out by turning on file and folder access auditing. So let's do that. It's actually very quick to do. So we'll go back to our folder, our test folder, go to properties, go to security, click on advanced, and then we simply check the auditing tab. From here we edit, and we click add. And if we want to audit everyone, we put in domain users. If you know someone in particular is a problem, you can put in just their name. Click OK. We'll say, hey, I want to know if anybody did anything. Then we'll click full. List, files, read, all those different things. Click OK. Click apply. So now in your security tab in Event Viewer, so if we go to Event Viewer, if we go to our security log file, then anytime anybody makes any changes, this is where that information will show up. It'll say whether someone deleted a file, moved a file, did anything like that. It'll give us that information right here. All right. Let's talk about volume shadow copy service. Shadow copying of files in shared folders allows you to configure volumes so that shadow copies of files in shared folders are created automatically at specific intervals during the day. This allows you to go back and look at earlier versions of files stored in shared folders. Shadow copying of open or locked files for backups. It allows you to use backup programs to backup files that are open or locked. So basically two different reasons for volume shadow copy. One is to allow people to go back in time to a file that may have been corrupted or deleted by accident. Shadow copying will save previous versions of those files so you can go back and get them without having to go to your backup program to retrieve them. Shadow copying of open locked files allows, basically, when you run your backup program, shadow copying will take an extra copy of that file so you can back it up. So if Tom has a file open and he goes home, it won't get backed up unless shadow copying is turned on. So shadow copying is very simple to get going. You just go back to your computer and you right click and you choose Properties, and then you click on Shadow Copies, click Enabled, click Yes. And now anytime a file is changed, except for system files, those don't get done, and neither do SQL files. But any other file like a Word or Excel document, anytime one gets changed, you can find them under these Previous Versions tab. And you can open the Previous Versions tab and you can go in and restore an older copy of those files. You'll see after several days this whole page get filled up with previous versions. It'll go back, I believe, 64 versions, or until it runs out of 10% of its hard drive space. So it won't use more than 10% unless you tell it it's okay to. So shadow copies are designed to help recover files that were accidentally deleted or corrupted or inappropriately edited. Users are able to actually recover the files themselves. They'll be able to go into the file properties themselves, or the folder properties, and they'll be able to see the files and recover them without your help, after you train them, of course. So after you configure shadow copying, you must install a client on computers throughout the organization. This is only true of Windows XP. Windows Vista and newer, Windows 7 and 8, you no longer have to do that. The shadow copy service will save up to 64 versions, as I mentioned earlier, and won't use up more than 10%. If a volume runs out of space, shadow copying will fail and errors will be generated. So we installed, in conclusion, we talked about installing and configuring file services role, DFS. Talked about disk quotas, file sharing, permissions inheritance, basic folder and file permissions, auditing, VSS, and shadow copies of shared folders. And that concludes Module 4.